I never expected that a simple phone call could turn my world upside down. Tyler, my husband of 6 years, casually dropped the bombshell. He was divorcing me and had already sold our apartment. His words were cold, calculating, as if he'd already moved on, leaving me to pick up the pieces. But what he didn't know was that the deed to our home had been in my name alone for months. As the pieces of his betrayal began to fall into place, I realized this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. What would happen next? The conference room buzzed with low chatter, and the soft hum of voices blended with the faint clinking of coffee cups. I sat there, trying to focus on the upcoming meeting, but my mind kept drifting. The phone in my pocket vibrated, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Tyler. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly dismissed the feeling. It was probably just a routine check-in. I stood up quietly, stepping out into the hallway, away from prying eyes. The call seemed sudden, but I figured it would be the usual small talk. "How's the trip going? When will you be home?" Simple questions, nothing out of the ordinary, but as I pressed the phone to my ear and heard Tyler's voice, something felt off. His tone was cold. Too cold. "I'm divorcing you," he said, his voice flat, almost smug. I froze. The words hit harder than any punch could. Divorce? The very word felt foreign coming from his lips. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what he was saying. My mind raced, searching for any sign, any hint of this coming, but there was nothing. I hadn't seen this coming. Not like this. He continued, his words nonchalant as if delivering a simple message. "I've already sold the apartment," he added, his tone almost triumphant. "So you'll need to figure out where you're going to live." I felt the blood drain from my face. The apartment, our home, the place we'd worked so hard for, the place that held every memory, every dream we'd ever shared, gone, just like that. The audacity, the complete lack of remorse in his voice shook me to my core. I could feel my heart racing, the world around me suddenly blurring. The hallway felt too tight, the air too thick. I could hardly breathe. My grip tightened on the phone, my knuckles white as his words echoed in my ears. "You sold the apartment?" I managed to ask, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "Yeah," he replied casually, as though the devastation he was causing didn't matter. "Nicole and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than a tiny place like that anyway." Nicole. His words hit like a slap. For months, I'd suspected that there was someone else, someone who had been the reason behind Tyler's sudden late nights, his business trips that always seemed to drag on longer than expected. But hearing her name from his lips, hearing him speak of her so easily, was something else entirely, as if I wasn't even part of the equation anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wouldn't let him see how badly his words had cut me. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing how much he had hurt me. My voice came out calm even as I said, "Sounds good." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a moment, and I could almost hear him smirking. There was no way I was giving him the satisfaction of knowing how deeply his words had affected me. No, I couldn't let him win. Not like this. I hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking in. The reality of what Tyler had just done, what he had just taken from me, was too much to grasp in the moment. I had to leave the hallway and walk outside for air, trying to regain control. How had everything come to this? How had the life I thought I knew turned into a nightmare in just a matter of minutes? But one thing was clear. Tyler thought he could break me, that he could walk away and leave me to pick up the pieces. He was wrong. There was something he didn't know, something that was going to turn the tables. I stood outside in the cold air, the weight of Tyler's words pressing on my chest. The harsh reality was setting in. He had sold the apartment, the very place that had been the foundation of our lives together. But as the sting of his betrayal began to settle, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about a home, it was about everything we had built, everything I had given him, and everything he had taken for granted. For months, I had suspected that something was off. Tyler's late nights at work, his sudden trips, the distant coldness between us, it all pointed to a third person. But hearing him speak her name, hearing him talk about Nicole with such ease as if she was the new center of his world, hit me like a ton of bricks. Nicole. The name had lingered in my mind for months, but now it was real and it was painful. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Tyler thought he could pull the rug out from under me and leave me scrambling, but what he didn't realize was that I was already 3 steps ahead. The next move was mine, and I was going to make it count. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, getting through my meetings, my mind focused entirely on what I had to do next. Tyler might have sold our apartment, but he hadn't taken everything. He still had no idea what I was capable of, and I was going to make sure that he never forgot it. As the day ended, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't going to cry. Tyler wanted a fight? Fine. But this was one fight he wouldn't win, not when I had all the power. And when I returned home that evening, my heart still raced with a mix of anger and anticipation. This was just the beginning, and Tyler had no idea what was coming for him. The following morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that hadn't been there the day before. The shock of Tyler's betrayal had worn off, replaced with a fiery determination. He thought he could break me, but what he didn't know was that I was no longer the naive woman who'd married him 6 years ago. I had changed, and I was ready to fight for everything he had tried to take from me. I called Chloe the minute I got up, outlining our next steps. I could hear the urgency in her voice as we discussed how to proceed with the legal battle. "You've got a strong case, Amelia," she said, her voice steady. "That deed is yours, and if Tyler's already taken money from the buyer, he's in real trouble. We'll make sure he pays for his actions." Chloe's words gave me a sense of confidence, but I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. I still couldn't believe what Tyler had done. The man I had trusted, the man I had spent years building a life with, had torn it all apart in an instant. And the worst part was how he had brushed me off, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle to his new life with Nicole. The day passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and frantic preparations. Chloe was working on the legal paperwork, while I made sure the buyer was informed about the fraudulent sale. We needed to get the word out quickly, before Tyler had the chance to cover his tracks or make any more impulsive moves. I spent the entire afternoon gathering all the documents I needed to prove my sole ownership of the apartment. Every piece of paper I pulled from the file seemed to fortify my resolve. This was my home. Not his, not Nicole's, mine. I couldn't let him take it from me, not now, not ever. The weight of the situation finally hit me. Tyler hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had tried to steal everything, my home, my security, the life we had built. And I was done being his doormat. The more I thought about it, the more disgusted I became. The lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for everything we had. All of it had been nothing but a game to him. But it wasn't just a game to me. This was my life. By the time I received Chloe's update that evening, I was ready. The buyer had agreed to work with us, and the legal letter outlining the fraud had been sent to Tyler. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control. "I've also got the divorce paperwork ready," Chloe added, as if reading my mind. "Once we deal with the apartment, we can proceed with that. It'll be official soon, Amelia. He won't be able to escape this." I nodded, though a strange lump formed in my throat. The thought of finalizing the divorce, of officially severing all ties with Tyler, felt both freeing and painful. I'd never imagined I'd be here. I'd never imagined that our marriage, something I had once believed in with my whole heart, would end this way. But there was no going back now. He had made his choice, and I had to make mine. I ended the call with Chloe, feeling a strange mixture of determination and unease. I wasn't sure how much longer Tyler would drag this out, but I knew one thing for sure. He was going to regret ever underestimating me. That night, as I sat in the apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside, I reflected on the past. The place no longer felt like home, not with the memories of what had happened. But it was mine, and that was something Tyler could never take away from me, not anymore. As I lay in bed, waiting for the next call, the next step, I knew this fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. The legal battle was underway, but I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for the paperwork to unfold. Tyler's betrayal still stung, and I had a deep, gnawing need to take control of the situation, to make sure that not only would he pay for what he'd done, but that I would be the one standing victorious in the end. It was a cold, rainy afternoon when I received the update from Chloe that I had been dreading and anticipating since the moment Tyler had sold the apartment. The buyer had officially rescinded the sale, and Chloe had sent the formal letter to Tyler, outlining the legal consequences of his actions. He still hadn't responded, but I knew the next move was his. He had no way out. The deal was void, and the truth was clear. His attempts to control my life, my home, were going to cost him more than he realized. That evening, as the rain continued to pour outside, I sat in the living room, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. The apartment was eerily quiet, no longer filled with the echoes of Tyler's presence or the clatter of his things. The space felt different now, emptier, but in a way that made it feel more like mine. The piles of his belongings were gone, the clutter of his life wiped away as if it had never been there at all. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm. But the calm was fleeting. My phone rang just after dinner. It was Tyler. I hesitated, staring at the screen, my fingers frozen on the edge of the table. I'd been avoiding his calls for days, and part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room. But I knew I had to deal with him, face to face eventually. This was just one more step in the process. I couldn't run from it anymore. I answered. "Amelia," Tyler said, his voice thick with frustration and anger. "What the hell is going on? Why didn't you tell me about the deed? Why didn't you warn me?" I leaned back in my chair, taking a steadying breath. "You never bothered to read the paperwork, Tyler. You never bothered to care about what was really going on. This is your mess, not mine." "I made a mistake," he said, almost pleading. "I thought it was all just a formality. You didn't need it. None of this matters if we just talk. Can't we just work this out?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Tyler had gone from being cold and distant to desperate in a matter of days. The man who had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could walk away with everything, was now trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for him. "No, Tyler," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences. You sold my home. You betrayed me. You don't get to just undo that with a phone call." There was silence on the other end, followed by a frustrated sigh. "You're being unreasonable," he said, his voice dripping with resentment. "You think this is just some game? You're making everything harder than it needs to be." I could hear the frustration in his tone, the helplessness. It was almost satisfying to know he was the one now scrambling, the one now struggling to fix what he had broken. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not anymore. "I'm not being unreasonable," I said firmly. "I'm done letting you walk all over me. I'm done letting you manipulate me into thinking I have to put up with your lies. You don't have control over me anymore. I've taken it back." Tyler's next words came out in a rush, as if he could feel the last remnants of his power slipping away. "I'm not going to lose everything, Amelia. I'm not going to let you ruin me. You can't just take everything. You lost it the moment you betrayed me," I replied, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is the life you've built, Tyler. You wanted it, now you have to live with it." He was silent for a long moment, and then, as if realizing he couldn't change anything anymore, he hung up the phone without another word. I sat there for a while, the phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the empty apartment around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about the apartment. This wasn't just about the betrayal. This was about me, taking control of my life, reclaiming my independence, and never allowing someone to make me feel small again. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I was done being a victim. Tyler had thought he could control everything, but in the end, it was me who had the power. And I was going to make sure he never forgot that. The days that followed Tyler's last desperate phone call felt like a strange calm before a storm. His absence in the apartment left a hollow space, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. There was an undeniable satisfaction in knowing that I had taken control of my own life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was coming. Tyler wasn't done, not by a long shot, and though I had already taken the upper hand, I knew the worst was still to come. I spent the following morning finishing up the last of the legal formalities with Chloe, going over the details of the fraudulent sale and ensuring the paperwork was in order. Tyler still hadn't responded to the letter, but that didn't mean he wasn't planning something. He had always been the kind of person to react impulsively when cornered, and I had no doubt that he was plotting his next move. He hadn't given up yet. I knew the next step in this battle would be a confrontation. Tyler would try to spin everything in his favor, and I needed to be prepared. Chloe and I had discussed the legal options in detail, and while I was confident the case was strong, there was something unnerving about the idea of facing him again. The lies, the manipulation, it all had to be untangled, piece by piece. That afternoon, as I sat in the living room, organizing some final documents and preparing myself mentally, I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the parking lot below. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced out the window, spotting a dark figure moving towards the building. Tyler. I quickly stood up, my mind racing. I wasn't ready for another round of his lies, but I knew it was coming. I could feel the tension building in the pit of my stomach. The doorbell rang moments later, and I hesitated before answering. I knew what was on the other side. When I opened the door, Tyler stood there, his face red with frustration and exhaustion. His posture was defensive, like a man on the verge of a meltdown. "You've made your point, Amelia," he said, his voice tight with anger. "But you don't have to do this. We can fix this. We can still work things out." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, my eyes cold as I studied him. The same man who had once been my partner now stood in front of me, a stranger, someone I barely recognized. His desperation was clear, but it wasn't enough to make me second-guess my decision. "You've taken everything from me," I said, my voice steady. "You sold my home, betrayed my trust, and now you think you can just walk back into my life? You don't get to fix this, Tyler, not anymore." He looked at me, a mix of disbelief and anger crossing his face. "You're being unreasonable. We had a life together, Amelia. Don't you care about any of that?" I spent the following morning finishing up the last of the legal formalities with Chloe, going over the details of the fraudulent sale and ensuring the paperwork was in order. Tyler still hadn't responded to the letter, but that didn't mean he wasn't planning something. He had always been the kind of person to react impulsively when cornered, and I had no doubt that he was plotting his next move. He hadn't given up yet. I knew the next step in this battle would be a confrontation. Tyler would try to spin everything in his favor, and I needed to be prepared. Chloe and I had discussed the legal options in detail, and while I was confident the case was strong, there was something unnerving about the idea of facing him again. The lies, the manipulation, it all had to be untangled piece by piece. That afternoon, as I sat in the living room, organizing some final documents and preparing myself mentally, I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the parking lot below. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced out the window, spotting a dark figure moving towards the building. Tyler. I quickly stood up, my mind racing. I wasn't ready for another round of his lies, but I knew it was coming. I could feel the tension building in the pit of my stomach. The doorbell rang moments later, and I hesitated before answering. I knew what was on the other side. When I opened the door, Tyler stood there, his face red with frustration and exhaustion. His posture was defensive, like a man on the verge of a meltdown. "You've made your point, Amelia," he said, his voice tight with anger. "But you don't have to do this. We can fix this. We can still work things out." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, my eyes cold as I studied him. The same man who had once been my partner now stood in front of me, a stranger, someone I barely recognized. His desperation was clear, but it wasn't enough to make me second-guess my decision. "You've taken everything from me," I said, my voice steady. "You sold my home, betrayed my trust, and now you think you can just walk back into my life? You don't get to fix this, Tyler, not anymore." He looked at me, a mix of disbelief and anger crossing his face. "You're being unreasonable. We had a life together, Amelia. Don't you care about any of that?" I felt a flash of anger rise, but I pushed it down. "You threw that life away the moment you decided to lie to me. You thought you could pull the rug out from under me and walk away without consequences. Well, this is what happens when you cross a line." Tyler took a step forward, his face contorted with frustration. "You're ruining me. You're going to regret this. You don't know what you're doing." His words had lost their weight. And now all I could hear was the sound of a man who had been backed into a corner, trying to find a way out. I wasn't buying it anymore. His manipulation no longer had power over me. "No," I said firmly. "You've already ruined everything. You can't walk away from this without facing the consequences of your actions." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with all the things we'd never say to each other again. Finally, Tyler turned to leave, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Before he could walk away, I called out to him. "And Tyler," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "don't think you can just take what's mine and get away with it. If you even think about trying anything else, I'll make sure you regret it." Tyler glanced back at me, his expression a mixture of defeat and rage. He said nothing, only nodded stiffly before walking out the door. As I stood there, the weight of the conversation sinking in, I realized something. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle or reclaiming my home. It was about taking back my life, my power, my voice, and my future. Tyler thought he could break me, but he hadn't. I had come out stronger, more determined, and ready to face whatever came next. As the door clicked shut behind him, I allowed myself a moment of peace. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The fight was far from finished. The days after Tyler's departure were strange, almost too quiet. The apartment, once filled with the noise of his presence, now stood still, almost echoing with the emptiness he left behind. But it wasn't a bad quiet. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. There was no arguing, no manipulation, no more pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. For the first time in a long time, I could hear myself think. But as the days went on, the reality of what Tyler had done started to sink in. I hadn't just lost a home, I'd lost the life I thought I had. And as much as I tried to focus on the future, the past kept creeping back in. The images of our life together, the good moments mixed in with the bad, would often appear uninvited, filling the silence. But I wasn't about to let those memories take me down. I couldn't. I had to keep moving forward. I had to. It was the following Friday afternoon when I received the next blow. My phone rang, and I saw Tyler's name flash across the screen again. I hadn't heard from him since our last confrontation, and I had been hoping it would stay that way. But there it was. His number staring back at me, demanding my attention. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the decline button, but something urged me to pick up. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I needed to hear what he had to say. Maybe it was because I wasn't quite ready to let go of the last shred of what I had thought was a partnership. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, just maybe, I wanted him to see that I wasn't the same person anymore. I pressed answer and waited as the line clicked. "Amelia," Tyler's voice came through, rough, tired, but still somehow full of arrogance. "I need to talk to you." I leaned back against the counter, my breath steady, but my heart racing. "Tyler, we've talked enough. There's nothing more to discuss." "I think there is," he said, his voice tight. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I've realized I made a huge mistake. I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to lose you." His words struck me like a slap to the face. This was the same man who had lied to me, sold our apartment without my consent, and dismissed me as if I were nothing more than a footnote in his life. And now he was here, asking for forgiveness as though he could just undo everything. I was quiet for a moment, taking in his words before I responded. "You don't get to just waltz back into my life, Tyler. You don't get to undo what you've done with a phone call and a few sorry words. I'm done." "I made a mistake," he insisted. "Please, just hear me out. Let's fix this. We can figure things out, I swear." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "No, Tyler, you don't get to fix this. You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." I heard him take a deep breath on the other end, as though he was trying to find the right words, but there was nothing left to say. The man I had once trusted, loved, was a stranger now, and I had no intention of letting him back in. "You've already crossed a line, and I'm not going to let you walk away from this without facing the consequences," I said firmly. "You tried to take everything from me, Tyler. You thought you could sell my home, betray my trust, and just move on with your life, but it doesn't work that way, not anymore. There was silence for a long moment, the tension between us thick. Then Tyler's voice broke through, quieter now, almost resigned. I don't know what to do anymore. I've lost everything. You've lost nothing that wasn't already lost, I replied coldly. Now I'm taking back what's mine, and there's no going back. For a moment he said nothing, and then I heard him sigh heavily. I get it. I messed up, but I won't stop trying to make this right, even if it's too late. I don't want you to try, I said, feeling a cold finality in my voice. I want you to leave me alone. With that, I ended the call. I stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, we could have fixed things. But I knew better. He had already shown me who he was, and that person wasn't someone I could trust. Not anymore. I set the phone down on the counter and looked around the apartment. It was still quiet, still mine, and I was done looking back. The future was wide open, and for the first time, I felt like I had the power to walk through it. Alone, but stronger than I'd ever been. I wasn't going to let him take this from me, too. The week after my conversation with Tyler felt like a slow burn, each day stretching out longer than the last. The silence in the apartment had become both comforting and suffocating. I had stopped looking at my phone every time it buzzed, knowing it was just another message from him or one of his half-hearted apologies. I couldn't bring myself to read them anymore. There was nothing left to say. But as the days passed, I could feel the tension mounting. It wasn't just about the apartment or the betrayal anymore. It was about what Tyler's actions had forced me to confront in myself. How had I let him get away with so much for so long? How had I allowed myself to be treated as an afterthought? I heard him take a deep breath on the other end, as though he was trying to find the right words. But there was nothing left to say. The man I had once trusted, loved, was a stranger now, and I had no intention of letting him back in. You've already crossed a line, and I'm not going to let you walk away from this without facing the consequences, I said firmly. You tried to take everything from me, Tyler. You thought you could sell my home, betray my trust, and just move on with your life. But it doesn't work that way, not anymore. There was silence for a long moment, the tension between us thick. Then Tyler's voice broke through, quieter now, almost resigned. I don't know what to do anymore. I've lost everything. You've lost nothing that wasn't already lost, I replied coldly. Now, I'm taking back what's mine, and there's no going back. For a moment he said nothing, and then I heard him sigh heavily. I get it. I messed up, but I won't stop trying to make this right, even if it's too late. I don't want you to try, I said, feeling a cold finality in my voice. I want you to leave me alone. With that, I ended the call. I stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, we could have fixed things. But I knew better. He had already shown me who he was, and that person wasn't someone I could trust. Not anymore. I set the phone down on the counter and looked around the apartment. It was still quiet, still mine, and I was done looking back. The future was wide open, and for the first time I felt like I had the power to walk through it, alone, but stronger than I'd ever been. I wasn't going to let him take this from me, too. The week after my conversation with Tyler felt like a slow burn, each day stretching out longer than the last. The silence in the apartment had become both comforting and suffocating. I had stopped looking at my phone every time it buzzed, knowing it was just another message from him or one of his half-hearted apologies. I couldn't bring myself to read them anymore. There was nothing left to say. But as the days passed, I could feel the tension mounting. It wasn't just about the apartment or the betrayal anymore. It was about what Tyler's actions had forced me to confront in myself. How had I let him get away with so much for so long? How had I allowed myself to be treated as an afterthought in our marriage? Those questions gnawed at me every night before I fell asleep, and I couldn't shake the unease that still lingered in the back of my mind. The hardest part was the unknown. Would he try to manipulate me again? Would he come back and make another attempt to fix things in a way that only suited him? I didn't know what his next move would be, and that uncertainty kept me on edge. Then, just as I thought the worst was behind me, I received an email. I stared at the screen for several moments, unsure whether I should even open it. But curiosity won out. It was from Chloe, and the subject line read, "Urgent, Tyler's next move." My stomach dropped. The subject alone sent a chill down my spine. I opened the email quickly, scanning the text, but as soon as I read the first few lines, my blood ran cold. Tyler was trying to get the sale of the apartment reinstated, claiming that I had intentionally misled him about the deed transfer. He was also threatening legal action, alleging that I had been hiding assets during the divorce process. The nerve of him. Chloe's message was clear. He's not done. He's trying to fight back, and he's desperate. We need to prepare for whatever he throws at us next. I couldn't believe it. After everything he'd already done, selling my home, betraying my trust, he was now trying to manipulate the legal system to get what he wanted. I was beyond furious. This wasn't just a man trying to take back his life. This was a man desperate to control the narrative and rewrite the ending. But I wasn't going to let him. I called Chloe immediately, my pulse racing. "What do we do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. "We move forward," Chloe said, her voice firm and reassuring. "We'll counteract his claims. We'll prove the deed was transferred properly and that you were transparent about everything. This is his last-ditch effort, and he knows it." I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I couldn't let Tyler win. I had fought so hard to get to this point, and there was no way I was going to let him tear it all down now. "Then we fight," I said, my voice resolute. "I'm not going to back down, not now, not ever." As I ended the call, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about the apartment anymore. This was about standing up for myself, about making sure Tyler knew that he couldn't control me any longer. I was no longer the woman who had let him manipulate her. I was stronger than. The following days were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and preparation. Chloe and I worked tirelessly to build a strong case against Tyler's claims, gathering evidence and lining up witnesses. The more I worked, the more determined I became. This was my fight now, and I was going to win. But despite all the legal moves we were making, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Tyler was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next chance to strike. The fight wasn't over yet, and I knew that when it came to him, I had to be ready for anything. The battle between Tyler and me had officially begun. After Chloe and I had put together a solid defense against his claims, I felt a surge of confidence, but it didn't last long. Tyler was relentless. His attempts to drag this out seemed to escalate every time I thought we had reached a breakthrough. The constant back and forth with lawyers, the mounting pressure, it was starting to wear on me. I had to remind myself why I was doing this. It wasn't just about winning in court. It was about reclaiming my life, my autonomy, and making sure Tyler knew that he could no longer control my future. It was a week after Tyler's latest move when I got the call. It was late in the evening, and I was sitting on the couch, papers spread out in front of me, when my phone rang. The screen lit up with Chloe's name. I answered immediately, already knowing that something had shifted in the case. "Amelia, it's getting worse." Chloe's voice was calm, but the tension was clear. "Tyler is threatening to go public with some information. He's hired a PR firm, and he's trying to spin this entire situation in his favor. He's even claiming that you're trying to ruin his career, that you're just out for revenge." A wave of nausea hit me. This was the last thing I needed. The thought of Tyler dragging our private affairs into the public eye made my stomach turn. I could already imagine the headlines: "Tyler, the wronged husband, and me, the woman who tore everything down." He knew how to manipulate a situation to make himself the victim, and now he was taking it to the next level. "He's not serious," I said, my voice a little shaky, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This is just another one of his tactics. He's trying to scare me, and it won't work." "I know," Chloe replied, "but we need to prepare. If he goes public, it could create a lot of complications. We'll need to act quickly to prevent any damage to your reputation. I'm already drafting a statement to refute his claims, but we need to be ready for anything." I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. For the first time, I realized just how far Tyler was willing to go to get what he wanted. It wasn't just about the apartment or the money anymore. This was about control. Tyler wanted to be in charge of the narrative, to make sure that the world saw him as the one who had been wronged, and I was the villain. But I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't let him define me. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Chloe and I worked together, drafting responses and contingency plans for every possible move Tyler might make. The media was the last thing I wanted to deal with, but I couldn't ignore it. Tyler had already proven that he would stop at nothing to win, and if that meant tarnishing my name, so be it. I spent hours in meetings, my thoughts constantly circling back to the decision I had made. Every step I took felt like a march forward into the unknown. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done letting Tyler call the shots. This was my fight, and I was in it for the long haul. By the time the PR firm sent over the first draft of the public statement, I was both relieved and apprehensive. This was it, the point of no return. Tyler had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. I read the statement carefully, making sure every word was precise, every fact backed up by evidence. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative. This time, I was going to tell my own story. With Chloe's help, we made the necessary edits and finalized everything. The statement would go live the next day, and I knew it would be a turning point in this fight. Tyler might have thought he was in control, but the truth was on my side, and I was finally ready to face whatever came next. As I sat back in my chair, looking out the window at the city below, I couldn't help but feel a sense of clarity. No matter how hard Tyler fought, no matter what he tried to throw my way, I had already won. This was my life, and I was no longer afraid to take it back.